Can a person be born in the wrong body? And why does the church insist on only two sexes? How do we accompany somebody struggling with gender dysphoria? Join us today as we explore those questions and many more with Archbishop Paul Coakley of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I'm Father Dave Pivonka, and I'm president of Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, and you're watching Franciscan University Presents. Please stay with us. Welcome to Franciscan University Presents. I'm your host, Father Dave Pivonka. I'm president at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio. Today we're discussing about how to walk with those who are experiencing gender dysphoria. I'm joined by our regular panelist, Dr. Regis Martin, professor of systematic theology here at Franciscan University, and Dr. Scott Hahn, the Father Michael Scanlon professor of biblical theology and the new evangelization, also here at Franciscan University. It's a great pleasure to welcome our special guest today, Archbishop Paul Coakley. Archbishop Coakley served as a priest for the Diocese of Wichita, Kansas for 21 years until his appointment as Bishop of Salina in 2004, and then in 2011 he was installed as the Metropolitan Archbishop of Oklahoma City. In 2022, his brother bishops elected him as the Secretary of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Archbishop Coakley has written a recent pastoral letter on the unity of body and soul, accompanying those who experience gender dysphoria, which we're going to discuss today. It's a great blessing to have you with us, Bishop.
Thanks, Father Dave. It's a great pleasure to be with you and panelists.
Now, this is not your first time at the university.
No, I was here one summer, a few years ago.
Right.
Dr. Hahn brought me here.
Before, I don't know if it was before I came back.
It was before you returned. But it was the last conference of the summer.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful experience, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to return.
That's a great blessing. I've been able to be with you a couple of times in your neck of the woods, so it's nice to have you in my home. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, maybe just, if we could, just begin, how is it? Did you always think about being a priest, or were you just going to always wanted to be an archbishop? Or how did that work?
Neither.
Neither. Okay.
None of the above.
Yeah.
No, I was blessed to have been raised in a good traditional Catholic family. Both of my parents came from Catholic homes and families, and raised us in the faith. And it was always very clear where I belonged. I remember in adolescence when I started having to complain about going to Mass on Sundays, and my dad put his foot down and said, Paul, as long as you live under this roof, you're going to get up and you're going to go to Mass.
Yeah.
So we did.
Didn't get you very far.
Didn't get me very
So
far.
you experienced the storms of adolescence like everybody
absolutely
else.
I did. Absolutely I did. And you know, I kind of drifted. I took my faith very much for granted as a teen. I wandered away. It was the 1970s and all that was happening in the world in late 60s and early 70s. And providentially, I ended up as a freshman in college at the University of Kansas and became involved with a program called the Pearson Integrated Humanities Program, which was a great books program for freshmen and sophomores. And I fell under the influence, if you will, of three marvelous professors, all of whom were Catholic in a state university. The program had a Latin motto, Nascantur in admiratione, let them be born in wonder. And it was really through the great books, through poetry, through stargazing, through waltzing, just kind of opening our hearts, our minds, our imaginations to consider things beyond ourselves.
I remember seeing the figure of Don Quixote perched on a horse.
That was always part of the brochure.
Right, looking at the stars.
Yeah.
And John Sr. founded
and
that
Nellick
program.
and Quinn.
John Sr., Dennis Quinn and Frank Nellick.
Yeah, it was the all-star team.
It was a tremendous moment, and it led to hundreds of conversions, quite literally,
In the 70s.
and quite dozens of vocations to the priesthood and consecrated life. And the Abbey at Clear Creek, the Benedictines, as a fruit of that. In fact, when I finished at KU, I made it my own pilgrimage to France and spent 8 months at Fontainebleau and
Is that right?
kind of discerning.
Yeah.
So that's what took you there, trying to figure out a vocation.
Yeah, but you know, I jumped ahead. There was a moment of crisis actually when I was an undergraduate. We went to Ireland for a semester, and they brought lock, stock, and barrel 150 KU students to Ireland. We stayed off the west coast on a little island called Inishbofin, beautiful place, and a bunch of kids from Kansas. The first week we were there, 2 of our brothers were out exploring. I was looking at this. This is going to be, you know, a 4-month sabbatical, you know, pub hopping across across Ireland. But the first week we were there, 2 of our friends had drowned.
Oh my God.
And I was 4,000 miles from home and had never dealt with death or mortality, and didn't know where to turn. And I ended up knocking on the rectory door in this little island, St. Coleman's Parish, and met this young priest. We spent several evenings together, talking and walking. We walked together actually in search of my friends before they were found to have been drowned. So anyway, he was very influential for me, and that's what finally kind of the Lord knocked on the door of my heart and opened it to the possibility that maybe being a priest wouldn't be the...
I mean, all the great encounters in history are personal.
Yeah, that's absolutely
Somebody singular, irreducibly special.
So
was your roommate with you at that point?
yes, I had a few of my roommates who were with, you're referring undoubtedly to Bishop Conley. Jim Conley and I grew up together. His cousins lived in our backyard, basically, and we played ball together in junior high. His dad was our coach. We went to the same high school. Our lockers were next to each other with Coakley and Conley.
That's so great.
And he wasn't Catholic, and I was barely Catholic by the time we went off to college, but we were both in this integrated humanities program together, and he became a convert to the faith through that program. He went to Ireland. He was with us at the time of the drowning of our 2 friends, and we both found our way to France, to the monastery, and I came back from the monastery in France, Fontainebleau, and went to see the vocation director, the Diocese of Wichita, and was enrolled in the seminary the following fall. You know, it was not something I ever dreamed that I would be, that as a priest, let alone a bishop. God's mysterious.
Gosh, the hand of God is unmistakable.
Yeah.
And you're both bishops.
We're both bishops.
Is it from the same state?
Yeah. Well, we were both priests of Wichita, and Bishop Conley was actually working in the Congregation for Bishops in Rome at the time that my name was proposed as a bishop, but they kept it away from him because they knew we were best friends.
That's great.
So I became a bishop, and then a few years later, he became a bishop. And so
that's extraordinary.
Yeah, we have this remarkable parallel course in our lives.
And you both had fallen under the spell of John Sr.
Oh, yeah. In fact, John Sr. was Bishop Conley's godfather when he entered the church. So,
oh, my heavens.
Yeah. It's just a beautiful story, too, that it was the intellectual life that really,
it really was.
began to kind of capture imagination.
The university experience for both of us was transformative in leading him to the faith and leading me kind of back to the faith and deeper into the faith.
I think Senior often described his task as that of a janitor. Let me just open the door and introduce these kids to the wonders and riches of their own past.
Yeah.
Our youngest son, David, went to Gregory the Great, which was inspired by Integrated Humanities Program.
Yeah, it sure was.
It was his own young adult conversion, awakening. But when you mentioned stargazing and poetry and all of that, I mean, you're not exactly waltzing. Yeah.
He did.
All of these things created imagination that is not necessarily explicitly Catholic supernatural, but it's like the more you make of nature, the more Christ can grace.
It's rooted in the real, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
A realism, a Christian realism.
Yeah, I gather that Senior had left Long Island at age 13. He ran away from home. He was in ardent search of reality.
Yes.
He stumbles upon these cowboys in North Dakota who introduce him to coffee and the stars. And he had been looking at the stars all his life after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his is a remarkable story as well, John Sr.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And it's led you to us, so it's a great blessing.
Yeah.
Maybe just the background. The document that you wrote, the pastoral letter, was really quite beautiful. Actually, I think all of the friars have read it. It was just really very, very well done. Where did that come from? What motivated it? With so many things that you could speak about, why that? Why now?
Well, I think the short answer would simply be that we were getting a lot of questions from school administrators, even in our Catholic schools. Young people questioning their gender identity, and it's with us. I mean, it's come like a tsunami, so it was just, and there was very little I could find that was really being given in terms of pastoral guidance, and that I'm not sure that I'm necessarily the expert that can speak to it, but I can talk to some people and gather some people to help put together.
Well, you mentioned, you cite the statistic that within the last 5 years, the number of people who identify as transgender has doubled. That's remarkable, and it's really
slowing
frightening.
No.
A couple of weeks ago, I saw a statistic, but you got to take it with a grain of salt, that now in public high schools, 1 in 4 identify as LGBTQ, and that the
Plus.
T is plus.
I'm not sure what the plus.
I don't
means,
either, but
1
the
in
T
4.
is really growing.
Repeating decimal.
Yeah, it's a contagion. It's a tsunami.
It's a trend, though.
It really is.
I mean, I really do not want to be minimalizing, because, and we're going to get to this, and I think the part that you do about the people that are suffering, walking them, is one of the most beautiful, and the families. But it is trending now. It's kind of the cool thing to do, and that's part of the pressure of being young people. I think it's just.
It is. It's trending, and largely highlighting the influence and impact of social media. That's how it trends. But the power of that, and it's not like trends from 50 years ago or 30 or 20 years ago even that were maybe less destructive. I mean, these are young people when their brains are not even fully yet formed, or they're not even able to vote or buy beer, are making decisions that it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives.
I mean, we certainly need to be compassionate, but we also need to be very clear about this. The trend is regarding something that's an aberration. It's psychotic, pathological. I mean, when I was in junior high school, the trend was guys would wear pegged pants and Cuban heels. I mean, there wasn't anything unnatural about that.
Right.
But to embrace transgenderism seems really bizarre.
Yeah.
Maybe in this first section, if we just distinguish, and I think, again, you do a wonderful job at this, between the individual who's struggling and the movement and the agenda and the activism, which I think is destructive, demonic, I think, honestly. It's just, it's so destructive. So maybe make a distinction there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as a priest, for me as a pastor, what I was trying to address is, the young person in front of me, or who's in pain, who's struggling, who's suffering, who's confused, or the parent who's pulling their hair out. How do I deal with this? So I think the pastoral response is really more the focus of this document, of this pastoral letter. But in order to get there, we had to present some of the anthropological, philosophical, theological foundations, and present some credible data as well from therapists and science. So the focus is really intended to be a pastoral focus and approach, very different from the impact that the movement or the ideology is having, and that needs to be addressed as well. But
and you quote the Holy Father, Pope Francis, about that, about the ideologies really coming against that, which is, I mean, he's been very clear and very
clear, hasn't he? Yeah, insistent.
Yeah.
Ideological colonization.
Yeah.
This anti-colonialism that has taken hold is sort of left the back door open for, in a darker, much darker way, a kind of colonial export of this LGBTQI.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be honest and see that, this is in the foreground right now, and it's trending. It's a kind of cultural fad for a day, but against the background of DEI, that is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And I think we have to recognize that the people who are using that are weaponizing that as well. If there's anything that is diverse and equitable and inclusive. It's the Catholic Church. But the people who are advancing DEI have contempt for traditional morality.
Sure.
And so this terminological battle is one that thus far we haven't won. In fact, we're losing badly. And so I would say what you're doing in the pastoral letter is not just useful, it's necessary. That is, you are shedding light on a dark situation, but it's the light of the gospel. I mean, you say joyful witness, you speak of accompaniment, but you also take seriously the need for counseling and for formation that includes the clergy, but the laity, and especially us parents. Yeah, to me, that is the only way to fight this. It's like a tar baby. I mean, if you just hit it, you're going to get it all over you.
Yep.
But if you shed light on it, you're going to really, I think, show people the way.
Diminish its power.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Scott, is that what we're seeing is, the vast majorities of schools, this has just become commonplace. And I think in some ways that we have been slow. The university, we can talk more about it later, the university's been working on a document on this whole issue as well for a number of years. And I think for young people, they're not hearing the church say anything about it, and they're hearing it from everybody else. And that's what we really have to be able to speak into. We'll have more to say in just a moment.
It's important that we express the true teaching of the church on human sexuality because it's for the good of the human person. We know that we don't want to be dismissive of persons, but we also don't want to be too permissive, especially when we're trying to walk with someone who is experiencing gender dysphoria. So how do we do this? I think the way that we do this is we recognize from the start that this is a person with immense dignity before us, and that they, like us, have struggles with sin, but also at times live virtuously by God's grace. If we can recognize that, we can seek to meet them where they're at, and it gives us the opportunity to share the teaching of the church and to love them in their experience.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We're discussing the beauty and the truth of creation, and specifically that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, male and female, and that actually matters. I'm sorry, but you were telling a story of something.
Yeah, I was about to relate that the week before I released this pastoral letter, I had received a troubling letter from a troubled parent about a child, a son or a daughter. And I don't want to say anything that would tip who it might be or from where. But their child had recently turned 18, legally an adult, and took the initiative to change their name legally to a more of a gender-neutral sort of a name. But their request of me was that as the child is walking across the stage to graduate from one of our Catholic high schools, that they be allowed to use their new name instead of their Christian name, the name given in baptism, that would better reflect their new identity. So this is how real it is, and this is good Catholic families, good Catholic high schools. So
now you seem to imply, Bishop, that at the heart of it is it's a lack of an understanding of not merely this, but a Christian anthropology, that the human person, so maybe speak to that, the human person is made in the image and likeness of God, and why this matters fundamentally to this issue.
Well, to me, it seems the most fundamental question and problem is the challenge to creation. I mean, just to reject the fact that we are creatures. It's that fundamental that we don't make ourselves, we don't create ourselves, but we are created by a God who loves us, in whose image and likeness we are created and formed, and who has created us after a certain pattern of wisdom and truth. A God who is love. I mean, all of those things come together in an adequate anthropology of how do we live out our
the body-soul composite. You can't really shatter it.
Right.
And I think you mentioned that when you separate the two, you diminish the humanity of the human person. I remember a conversation I had with John Crosby, who had been debating a rabid feminist who said, John, it really doesn't matter what we do to our bodies as long as we respect the person. I mean, that's kind of schizophrenic. You prescind the body from the person. As if
Dualistic.
we've got two separate beings here. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
What did you tell the mother?
I published this letter, and she'll be at graduation next week. So I haven't had a conversation with her yet, but we.
It could get
sent her
sticky.
the letter. Yeah.
But this image of God that we bear is so simple yet profound, and it's so primordial. I mean, in Genesis 1, verse 26,
Male and
let us make man, and then male and female. So it's not just the soul that is unique compared to the animals. So it is the soul with intellect and will to know what is true, to choose what is good, but it's just as much the body. The body that we do share with animals, as well as gender. But nothing is said about the animals being male or female, because for them it's plumbing, it's perpetuating the species. But for us, it's imaging God, physically, spiritually, but personally and interpersonally. And I would say the idea that you're made male and female is true in a unique way, I suppose, for our first parents. But I would advance this along the lines of John Paul and Benedict and Francis by pointing out that really nobody is just born a person and then they choose male or female. In fact, nobody's really born a male or a female. You're born a son or a daughter. There is a relational realism, a kind of covenantal matrix that I think sometimes in our own defensiveness, we're like, no, male and female, but it's like, step back and look at the beauty of the interpersonal reality, even if your parents are flawed, like all of our parents are. Nevertheless, I mean, it really is a case in which the family as the matrix for personalism has got to be affirmed and protected, as well as just celebrated. I mean, and I think we need to get off the defensive and recognize that.
That word that you use, primordial, I think that's le mot juste. It's really the appropriate term. It's fundamental, constitutive. Let me share an anecdote that I found very amusing. My granddaughter, Isabella, is not even 4 years of age, but I asked her the other day, what do you want to do with your life, Isabella? And she said, I want to be a carrot so that people can put me in their salad, and the carrot has to be pink because I'm a girl, and girls are pink. Boys are blue, and I don't ever want to wear blue. She has this irrefutable sense that she is a girl. It's unmistakable. And she's only 3.5 years of age. A lot of adults can't make that distinction. I mean, they've been so bludgeoned by this transgender ideology that they're frightened. They don't have the courage to draw those distinctions.
And yet she's not going to be a carrot.
No.
But I say that because the reality is we have a population that are really struggling. What am I? I've talked before is that there's this transition that's taken place from who am I to what am I, this fundamental metaphysical question of what am I? And she's not a carrot. She's, if she says that in 10 years from now,
then
she needs to talk
therapy.
to somebody, right? But isn't that the case? Is that we live in a population where the culture says that whatever an individual says, that we have to affirm that. And it's cute when she's 4 years old.
Yeah, I mean, it's become so fluid. The only fixed point is I decide what I'm going to be.
Exactly.
And that changes. I mean, that's an invitation to disaster and misery.
But if we live in a world without truth, how are we to question that, right?
Yeah.
If truth is what I define it to be, then who am I to say that it's not? And I think your point is well taken, Scott, about the whole issue related to biology, right? Not just, that's a part of it, but oftentimes we just kind of fall back to that, and it's totally incomplete. I mean, it's important because it matters. I can't remember what it was. Just in the last couple of days, I filled out a thing and it asked my gender. It was a exercise program thing. And it gave this explanation on why it matters if you were born male or female. It realized that it had to deal with this, but it says as a male, your muscles are differently, your body's different. So it was kind of this, they were stuck between a hard fence.
Well, I like the distinction that you draw, that we don't have bodies. We are the bodies we have, and they are enlivened by spirit. I mean, that's so wonderfully Thomistic. I mean, you always begin with the senses. What do you see? My granddaughter sees a girl. Others see a boy, and she intuitively knows they're different. It's ineluctable. It's sort of like fate. I mean, Freud was mistaken about mostly everything, but when he said anatomy is destiny, that's one of the few pronouncements I think that was spot on. Anatomy really is sort of destiny. I mean, I can't have a baby, but I can help raise one. I mean, that's a sundering difference. But we're surrounded by people who don't know that.
Or deny it.
Or deny it,
Yeah, but the fact that the soul is the form of the body, I mean, that's not just biology. That's not even mere psychology. That is the light of revelation illuminating the natural sciences so that we might realize Aristotle saw it apart from the Bible. But if the soul is the form of the body, you're not going to have a female soul trapped in a male body. You know, they're going to be united. And it's not just a coincidence. It really is a kind of coherence where they're going to illuminate but also express the person, you know, and what God has joined together, let not man put
asunder. That's right.
Or persons.
I heard the other day on NPR that there's this poor girl in Florida who had to flee the state because of Governor DeSantis, because he's oppressing her or him. She's now living in Rhode Island, where she can express her gender freely. But really what she's in flight from is reality. The reality is you are a girl or a boy, whatever God conferred. It's really a crisis of God because he's the author of nature. And if we reject nature, if we denature ourselves, we're really insulting God, who's the author of all that.
Yeah.
So it's a first question we're grappling with.
I agree. I think it's really a question of who we are in relation to God. Non serviam. I will not serve. I will not submit. I'm going to define myself. I'm going to be myself.
And that's the demonic dimension to this that you mentioned, Father.
You stated that that they recognize that their desire, that there's something rooted in this, is a desire for good. And maybe just speak to that, because I thought that was a good insight.
Well, it's kind of the way we're wired, is it? We choose the good, we seek happiness, and what we think will make us happy. Very often we end up choosing goods that are inadequate, that cannot deliver what the attractive packaging seems to promise. Madison Avenue knows that very well. Well, maybe they don't admit it, but they don't want to admit it. But we're made for more. And so I think very often people that are choosing bad things they're doing it. Even somebody in this case of gender dysphoria and transgenderism, a desire to become or to be a person of another gender or sex is rooted in something good that they might see or perceive is represented by that.
I was preaching on this the other day, and one of the things I was thinking about is that desire, which is a good desire to belong. And that if you don't feel like you belong with yourself, then you're going to look for something other. And I think that that's a part of it, is that they, for one reason or another, and we're not going to get into what might cause all of that, this longing to belong, to be accepted. Now, again, it's misguided, but I think that might be a part of it.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the error, as you point out in the pastoral, goes back to first principles, which is in some ways why it's so hard to address. Because, you know, if you set out on a journey and the first move you make is wrong, then you might make every other move right, but you'll end up about as far as you can be from where you started off or where you want to be. And I think of gender itself as being that mangled first principle. The notion that gender is a social construct. You know, ironically, the notion itself is a social construct.
Yeah.
You know, when in fact, society is a gender construct, beginning with marriage, beginning with family, then the extended clan, all the way until you have the 12 tribes that form the nation of Israel. And if you look at the ancient city by Découlange, looking at Greece, this is true across the board. It only takes a little bit of postmodernism to recognize that calling gender a social construct is deliberately targeting family in order to deconstruct it. And I mean, to take it back to male and female, where you find love expressed in a life-giving way that you don't find among siblings or neighbors as such, only in this unique bond of marriage. And so the sexual revolution just made this sort of thing not only predictable, but I think in a certain way inevitable. And so we really have to fight this and recognize that if they have contempt for our morality, we ought to just return the favor and express a respectable contempt for their ideology. And at the same time, not be on our heels defending ourselves, but just say, look in the mirror and look at history and look at reality.
Call it what it is. Yeah.
I resist the argument that we should just treat this as a kind of passing fad. It's a fashion, it'll go away, sort of like the hula hoop. It's more like Marxism. That wasn't treated as a fad. I mean, it managed to amputate the memory of Russia for about 70 years, and it's still in recovery. I mean, Marxism did a great deal of damage to the human spirit and to great numbers of innocent human beings. I think transgenderism is every bit as destructive, but even more insidious. It's not just heaping contempt on traditional morality, it's an exercise of contempt at the expense of reality being the constitution of created existence. I mean, if that's the nature of your assault, the gravamen that you want to somehow subvert and destroy, then you have serious problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an epistemological question. Do we not know the difference between men and women? I mean, who's going to instruct people about that? I don't think it's a function of knowledge. It's a value judgment they've made, and that judgment is completely insane. It's a kind of madness.
Yeah, we'll be right back with more Franciscan University Presents, and Regis will help us know distinctly the difference between the male and the female.
The way you talk with teenagers and younger children about gender dysphoria, well, one way you can do it is first off, you always want to start with listening. So you ask them, where is this coming from? What is happening? And you listen to them and you try to figure out what makes it flare up, what makes it not flare up. So if it's a female child, you figure out when do they feel most female, when do they feel most male? And then after that, you talk to them a little bit more. And one thing you can say is, let's say this is a female child, you say, what a female is, just biologically, is it's a person organized with their body in a certain way, and a female really is a person with a female body and any personality. It's not a person with a female personality and any body.
Walk in the footsteps of saints and martyrs on a Franciscan University pilgrimage. You'll explore the treasures of your Catholic heritage in the Holy Land, Poland, France, Austria, Italy, and more destinations. Find out more at franciscan.edu/pilgrimages.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us. You're watching Franciscan University Presents, which we record here in the ComArt studio at Franciscan University in Steubenville. Our students are operating all of the camera equipment, and our theology professors, Dr. Martin and Dr. Hahn, and I are discussing how to accompany people who are experiencing gender dysphoria. We have our special guest, Archbishop Paul Coakley, and I think that's at the heart of the issue is how do we, the son or the daughter, and we were talking earlier, this is something with the parents here, but just as a pastor, Archbishop, what's been your experience and how can we best accompany that individual?
One of the things I think is just to be in conversation, to really be intentional about being in a relationship with sons and daughters. I think very often we let perhaps a wall grow within relationships, and we or in a marriage for that matter, we just don't communicate. We stop communicating at any kind of a significant level. This is something that for parents will require some conversation about. But if it's the only thing that you're going to converse about, you're getting off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I like what you said. When they come to you, the first thing is to ask questions.
Yeah.
I thought that was really insightful. Just try to get a sense of what's going on. Where is this coming from?
Don't assume too much.
Right.
Don't presume that you understand what's going on. Yeah.
I remember coming across a line in Luigi Giussani. He was trying to determine what struck him most about Jesus. And he said the real miracle about Christ was the way he looked at people, like Zacchaeus, come down from that tree, I want to have supper with you. The look was a look of love, love and truth harnessed together in the most exquisite way that makes the listener realize he cares about me. It really matters who I am. He wants to get at the heart of what's bothering me.
Yeah, as you're describing that, I'm thinking of the Caravaggio painting of the Call of Matthew with that beautiful gaze with the light focusing. Yeah. Yeah, there has to be that sense for the child, for the son or the daughter to know that they're being beheld by a parent who really cares about them, who loves them.
I mean, how can you accompany them if you don't look at them?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, as a parent, I know with 6 kids who are all now adults, but they went through the teens, and it's a troubling, difficult time, you know, and especially for girls, I think, the changes in their body and a culture where sexuality has just been commercialized in ways that we don't need to get into. But the transgender, I mean, if you're just simply thinking about the children themselves, you would want to just basically attack what is going on with the hormone treatment and the, you know, the surgery, because I mean, 40% in terms of suicidal thoughts, 9 times more likely to attempt suicide. It's not the first disorder to afflict teenagers or preteens. You know, the fact is, I have a friend whose daughter went through this for a few years, and they didn't come down and just, you know, crash her party and condemn her or throw her out. You know, she's back, but it was hard, and it took time, and it took a lot of patience. I also know another father whose daughter had an eating disorder, and it wasn't just an instance for judgment, you know, but when you discover what she sees herself, how she sees her body, you know, you just don't waste time spending hours and hours reconnecting, reaffirming, and just loving, even if it means rebuilding.
Yeah. And that's one of the things you said, Archbishop, in your letter, is that unfortunately with this, it's not just a fad, but it's a really dangerous fad, because some of these literally kids are getting puberty blockers and surgeries. So it's going to have you know, your friend worked through it and they walked through it, but in so many places, these kids can go and they can get this treatment without mom and dad even
Without the
knowing.
parental notification. Yeah.
But this was a Catholic family, it was a homeschooling family, and they were in a state of shock. It took them weeks to even accept that this could happen to them. But it's not just them.
Right. The example that you cite of the eating disorder, I think, is really instructive. There must be parallels between the two. I once knew a student who was anorexic, and for me, the solution was quite simple. Sit down and have a hamburger, for heaven's sakes. No, have 2 hamburgers. But I was told by an expert, this is one of the most intractable problems that people face.
But it's
virtue is not knowledge.
Because I've used that a couple of times, is, you know, if an individual, and you're on a college campus and you have kids that struggle with that, obviously that's not the answer. So you can't just say get over it. But the other part is that imagine if somebody came and they said, I feel fat, I don't feel like I want to eat. We would say, then don't eat.
Right.
But of course we wouldn't do that, because that's not loving the person. But when young people today are coming and they say, I feel like a boy, I think I should have surgery, fine, have this. I mean, we just treat these things radically different.
Yeah, we can't give them an aspirin when they're in junior high school without mother's permission. But you can smuggle them across the state and have them chemically castrated.
Yes.
One of the things, Bishop, that, again, this idea of the conversation, there was a study that was done about young people whose faith stuck, you know, over the years. And one of the common denominators was young people who felt that they could talk to their mom and dad about things that they disagreed with, about church teaching, or this, and mom and dad didn't freak out. And you seem to imply that mom and dad need to take a rest. So how do they handle it? From your perspective, maybe the parent's perspective.
Yeah, to be willing to hear some hard things as a parent without rushing to fix or to judge or to correct. Just to try to enter into the worldview to understand what a child, what a son or a daughter is experiencing, and to listen with love. And to show that appropriate compassion, and then from that foundation of love and respect, the parent can guide and offer direction and suggestion and correction, but without the relationship, without that covenant.
You know, it's hard for some people, and I'm going to include myself in this, because my parents separated. We were able to kind of prevent them from divorcing. They ended up getting back together. It was détente from then until the end. But you start parenting and you're insecure, and so you're anxious. And only too late do you discover that practically the definition of fathering is non-anxious leadership, not just leadership. It can be domination at that point and manipulation. But early on, I had my father-in-law to step in and help me to recognize non-anxious leadership is really one way. But if you look at God the Father, how does he generate the Son? It's not physical. He affirms from all eternity the Word. And if that's the case for constructing eternal life in the divinity, then the word of affirmation, I have found, you have to be willing to criticize, but you have to do it in the larger context of love. I didn't criticize my children or punish them because I stopped loving them or because I started loving them less, but because I couldn't stop loving them. And you have to do that, but you also have to be willing to apologize. I did that hundreds of times, but I also gave them what we called a day of jubilee. And that is, if you come to me with a question, an objection, or anything you've done wrong, I'm going to grant you pardon in the sense that you're going to go unpunished if you volunteer this. Because that's how fathers father me in the confessional. I turned around and we had so many breakthroughs in our kids and our family. That's beautiful. Because I would just say, tomorrow's a day of jubilee. Whatever you come clean on, you will go unpunished.
That night they went out. Don't give them too much of a heads up.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And maybe just maybe some thoughts about, you talk about the suffering and the embracing of that, and I think that's real. It's the part of my mind, we don't get it, we don't understand it, it doesn't make sense. It seems so simple, and yet it just isn't in their experience. And it's, if you've ever walked with somebody, it's really, there's a great suffering in that. So maybe speak to that.
Yeah. It's the mystery of the cross in a certain sense. There's no way around it. You have to go through it, and that's where grace is experienced. That's where freedom and liberation and peace will come by walking through the suffering with Christ. So I think our natural fight or flight instinct, we seek to avoid what's uncomfortable, what's difficult, what's painful, and yet very often I think we're called just to be with somebody in their pain or suffering, and in a way that is affirming, supportive, loving, primarily loving.
Yeah. When C.S. Lewis sat down to write The Problem of Pain, he admitted straight away, it's a lot easier to write about it than to have to endure it. But he made the point that with Jesus, he doesn't eliminate your pain. He rather enters into it and takes it on himself, which redeems it. Your misery is there, but there's meaning to it because God himself has assumed it.
Yeah, and you're not in it alone.
Right.
And it's a transformation. The Stoics could have probably generated the conclusion, no pain, no gain. But the idea that he endures pain and turns it into the passion that redeems his executioners, that's more than transubstantiating bread and wine. He is transforming pain into something that is not merely meaningful. It's divinizing.
Glorious.
That's too good to be true, unless it is true, in which case that couldn't have been man-made. That has to come from God. And I think this gets me back to what Regis was saying a few minutes ago, and that is, you really can't deal with this until you've diagnosed it. You can't give aspirin to someone with AIDS. You've got to really go to the root of it. And in this case, Marxism, I think you're right. It's not economic Marxism as it was at the time of the Russian Revolution. But I remember Solzhenitsyn diagnosing the Russian condition. Simply, he said, look, the elders would sit around the villages and just say, men have forgotten God. Well, they didn't forget the divinity. They just no longer were willing to talk about him in public because they had kind of privatized or relativized it all. And nature abhors the vacuum. And Marxism came in for the sake of the peasants and then killed them by the millions. And I would say the same thing is happening with sexual liberation. Only now it's the Frankfurt School, and it's Adorno, it's Habermas, people that most students here don't know. And yet they've got to. Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and I'm thinking of Deleuze and others, and I'm just discovering now, only too late, and I'm an academic, But we have to recognize that you had Lenin, you had Stalin, you had Marx, you had a lot of these figures over a century ago. But I mean, in higher education, these men, though dead, rule the world from the grave. And we have got to get much more serious about showing this, digging up the roots of this sort of critical theory, critical race theory, critical sex theory. But I mean, it is Marx on steroids.
And the thing about it is, I do believe, and we maybe are naive, is how orchestrated it is. And it has been for a long time. And we're seeing it now, but there has been a lot that's been taking place in the background that we're now seeing, reaping the fruit of that. Now, Archbishop, maybe you released the letter a number of weeks ago now?
A couple of weeks. Mm-hmm.
Response, what are people saying?
It's been, I'd say, primarily positive response, words of appreciation from priests. I asked my priest council if this would be helpful to attempt to say something, speak into this topic, and they were very supportive of it and encouraging me to do so. So I'd say, by and large, the response has been very positive, very encouraging. There's been some naysayers, from the usual suspects. So,
well, the timing of it, I thought, was grand. Not just because the age demands a response, a prophetic response, but Good Shepherd Sunday seems so apt. People really do need a good shepherd.
Yeah.
They need to regard themselves as sheep, dutiful, submissive, because that's the only liberation
and cared for
that counts. Loved.
Yeah.
Jesus holding that lost sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you met with your priests, did you give them a part of a voice in this, in how to create it, or?
Not the presbyterate at large, but I did consult some of the individuals whose voices and whose opinions were particularly important to me, whose perspectives. This was kind of done a bit, I won't say undercover, but I didn't let it out there that this was forthcoming, just because I was a little concerned about what the reaction and the.
And I just wondered, the reason is because like you said, this is here and it's here for good, and to be able to meet with the priests and talk about it and get a sense, because they've got their feet on the ground. So up next, our panel and our guests are going to give their final thoughts on today's topic. Please stay with us.
Well, the first thing you need to remember is that this is probably not an activist, a transgender ideologist sitting across from you. The first thing to remember is it's a person that's held in existence by God, loved by God, no matter what their problem is, whatever difficulty they're bringing. The second thing I'd remind people of is that you're fortunate that they're raising the issue with you, especially if you're a parent. It means you have their trust. Or maybe they want to get belligerent about it, but don't play that game. You ask them questions. When did this start? How does it feel? What do you mean? Not as a form of interrogating the child or the person, but as a way of coming to understand what their actual experience is.
When you see the world through a Catholic lens, you see God's hand at work in human history. You see the true, the good, the beautiful. Franciscan University of Steubenville's Master of Arts in Catholic Studies is an online program that offers courses in literature, biology, art, theology, psychology, all taught from a distinctively Catholic perspective, so you can see the world with Catholic eyes. Find out more about the Masters in Catholic Studies. Go to franciscan.edu/MCS.
Welcome back to Franciscan University Presents. We've come to our final segment. I invite Regis for your concluding
Yeah, I
thoughts.
think, like everyone, I'm very grateful to you for this letter. I think you strike an admirable balance between, on the one hand, really denouncing the movement, but on the other hand, an open-hearted gesture of accompaniment to those who are victimized by it. We mustn't dismiss these people, but we mustn't be so permissive that we want to allay the pain by giving away the game. We can't do that. What they're doing is wrong, but these are human beings whom Jesus went to the cross to redeem, and so we have to walk with them and try and disabuse them of this. But it's going to take a long time. But it's been happening now for a long time. one of the great discoveries I made was just G.K. Chesterton's The Dumblocks, which came out about 90 years ago. So it's sort of an anniversary episode. But he identifies the Renaissance as really the moment in history when men for the first time began to think that being was bad. To be or not to be, that's the question. For Aquinas, it was never a question. It was a judgment, an affirmation. You know, God's word is always yes. It is good to be. And when things go bad, it's not being that's bad, it's the abuse that's bad that needs to be corrected. That's the only optimistic philosophy we have, and the church has upheld it now for more than 2,000 years, and it runs through your letter like a kind of golden thread. And I'm so grateful to you for the narrative, and I just hope that the right people read it. Thanks again.
Thank you. Scott?
You know, I feel like we're almost coming full circle to the first episode where you were talking about in that segment your conversion, even as a cradle Catholic, you know, because it was in the integrated humanities program, not just by studying the great books, but by reading poetry to each other, stargazing, as well as waltzing, and just discovering the goodness of creation, not for the purpose of denying that it's fallen, but still things are good, male and female. Everything is affected by the fall, but the fall is moral, it's not metaphysical. And so discovering being is really the master key, you know, that you need, and not just in theory, but in practice. You don't just read about poetry, you read poetry and all of the rest do. But I think that what you've done in this pastoral letter, I've read it twice now, and I'm sharing it with my extended family and friends too, along with the Archbishop Alexander Sample. He's done a great job in writing a pastoral too. And the two are distinct but complementary, and likewise Bishop Burbage. And I'm hoping that we might find a way to compile this and get it out there so that it's not just online, but it's also in hand. But I recognize the distinction. Your emphasis is on the pastoral, and not just for the clergy to learn, but for the clergy to encourage the parents. Parents need to read this. I mean, I want to say that at least 8 or 10 times. I'll just say it one more time. Parents need to read this. And then talk to their priests about the things that are going on in my own immediate family or in an extended family or in our neighborhood as well. Otherwise, we're just going to be, you know, sticking our heads in the sand and trying to, you know, pretend that it's not real. You know, once upon a time, there were normal people responding to eating disorders. You weren't trying to aid people in binging and purging. You were trying to counsel them through it. It just shows now how disordered the society is.
Yeah.
That and what we have to work with then is almost exclusively found in the Christian tradition, and especially in the Catholic Church. Would that we had more and more faithful shepherds giving pastorals like this. Thank you.
Good. Final thoughts, Archbishop?
Well, I've found this conversation very, very stimulating and encouraging. So thank you for your thoughtful reading of the pastoral letter and your thoughtful feedback and encouragement around it. I'm very much indebted to the teachers that formed me, beginning with my own parents, the loving home and Catholic upbringing that I had at Catholic schools, and then later at the University of Kansas, and my professors at the IHP, Integrated Humanities Program. So it really did shape and form me a worldview that I think we have lost sight of. But it certainly formed me as a human being, as a man, and my vocation. So I hope these thoughts might be helpful, beneficial to parents. I think that's the type of audience for which the pastoral letter is primarily intended: parents and pastors, and people who accompany those young people who are struggling.
Great, thank you so much. If you would like to learn more about today's topic, we have a free handout containing selections of the Archbishop's pastoral letter on the unity of the body and soul, accompanying those experiencing gender dysphoria. This handout is yours if you go to faithandreason.com/presents or by calling the number that we will provide momentarily. I had an experience a number of years ago where I was watching. It was early in the morning. I was actually going to Mass with the sisters out, and I saw one of our students training. She was a runner. She's about 5'0" in weight, maybe 100 pounds, but she was just tough as nails. It was at the same time when I was reading on the news about this athlete from Penn who was a swimmer, and before COVID was a male swimmer, and after COVID came back as a female swimmer. And I was just struck on this student who was up early in the morning and working and running and training, and then what would it look like if she had to compete against somebody who was a biological male? So I felt the need to write an op-ed piece that the USA Today ultimately picked up. Even the process of me writing that, we had presented them the text, and they got back to me, and they said, we'll accept this, but you need to change a few things. And it really became a point that I had to decide whether or not I was going to do that. And one of the things that they don't allow you to use is the word biological male or biological female. It's against their editorial policies. And I wrestled with, like, do I want to do this? But my experience is that nobody else is talking about this. So I said, yes, we'll go ahead and we'll make those changes. The number of we got the negative press, which I expected, but the number of people that wrote back that said, thank you.
Yeah.
They said Franciscan University has a platform, you have a responsibility, and it's something that I don't think I take very seriously, that the Lord invites us to speak, and to speak boldly and courageously. And that's what I was experiencing when I was reading your letter, is that there's a number of, unfortunately, bishops who don't want to enter into that. They'll enter into other controversies, but not this. This is like and when I saw that you'd written this and we were going to have an opportunity to speak about it, I was first filled with gratitude that somebody's willing to say something. But it wasn't just that you wrote, it was the manner with which you wrote, which was, honestly, it was a shepherd's heart. It was a pastor's heart. It was a father's heart. And it was laying out, these are the issues, these are the struggles, and just a very simple path forward. And that was conversation, accompanying with, walking with, suffering with, I think, with moms and dads. And I think you just provide a path forward that's reasonable, it's filled with faith, it's filled with hope, and I thank you for that. So, Archbishop, thank you so much. Maybe you could offer us your blessing.
I'd be happy to. Thank you very much. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
With your spirit.
And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Again, and we thank you so much. And we continue to offer our prayers and reflections, particularly with families who are struggling with issues such as this. I know that you're in our prayers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Download a free handout on today's topic at faithandreason.com/presents. You can also watch past episodes of Franciscan University Presents or request the handout by emailing us at presents@franciscan.edu. Or reach us by phone for today's handout by calling 800-783-6447. That's 800-783-6447.